having a difficult conversation. So far, we have discussed how to create understanding between two parties by breaking down our judgments into observations, feelings, and needs, and also how to move our conversation forward by making a request. We also looked at how to create a good dialogue flow. Now, in this lesson, I'll be talking about how to have a difficult conversation. In the previous lessons, if you have done the dialogue activities, you would have noticed that the instruction asked you to pick an episode that is not too emotionally intense. So, on the scale of 1 to 10 in terms of intensity, a 5 or a 6. But there are bound to be times in your life when you face conflicts in which your emotional level is a 10. And if you have faced such episodes in the past, you might remember that it was challenging to resolve the conflict calmly. Being skillful in our communication is not about preventing or avoiding such situations. It's about knowing how to handle them when they arise. So, how can we have a conversation to resolve issues when the issues are triggering a highly unpleasant emotional experience within us? So, in this lesson, I'll be sharing 3 main skills for how to engage in a difficult conversation. The first skill is in checking on our reactivity and deactivating it. The second skill is in preparing for a difficult conversation. And the third skill is in conducting a difficult conversation. So let's start with the first skill, which is to check on our reactivity to a challenging situation like a conflict and finding ways to deactivate it. It helps to first look at what your habitual reactions are to conflict. You might remember this chart from our previous lesson on decision making, and we have a spectrum of ways in which we tend to react to conflict from passive to aggressive. To review, on the passive end, we have conflict avoidance, which is to pretend that all is going well and suppressing your feelings and needs. Another passive behavior is let the other have their way, which is to avoid conflict by giving up your needs and your views and letting the other person have their way. Now, examples of aggressive behaviors include opposition and confrontation, which is an attempt to deal with an issue through an aggressive behavior, perhaps by shouting or asserting your dominance. Another aggressive behavior is passive aggression. Now, this includes the word passive, but it's essentially an aggressive behavior because it's an expression of hostility, but often accompanied by verbal or other communication that all is well. So it's a confusing form of an aggressive behavior. Now, as you observe yourself, you might find yourself reacting in one or more of these patterns when you have a conflict. This is not to say that you should punish yourself for these behaviors. Remember, when you sense a threat, your amygdala in your brain gets activated, which can trigger heightened sense of anxiety, fear, anger, and defensiveness. These passive or aggressive reactions to conflict have simply been adopted by us to help protect us and keep us safe from this perceived threat. So, what's important at this point is to recognize this pattern and find ways to deactivate the heightened emotions so that we can respond assertively. So, when we are engaging in an assertive conversation, the first thing that we want to do when we notice ourselves getting emotional is to monitor our activation. It's about getting to know what happens when our nervous system is activated. When something is triggering anger or sadness or hurt, is your heart rate increasing? Is your breathing fast or shallow? Is there tightening in your hands, jaw, or stomach? Is there sweating or feeling of hot or cold? What is it that signals that you are being activated? Now, once you sense this, you want to take some time to ground yourself. So you want to learn to pause, ground, and track the reactivity in your body. This can include inserting a pause in a conversation to rebalance. You can do this by taking a long breath or purposefully taking a pause between sentences. You can also ground your attention in your body by feeling gravity, your hands, feet, or breath. And the last technique is to orient to your surroundings by listening to sounds around you or looking around and grounding yourself to where you are in that moment and not letting yourself be carried away by your emotions. And once you ground yourself and bring your presence to the now, you can attend to your deactivation, giving attention to settling or easing in your experiences. So, this can be done by paying more attention to the out breath. When you are activated, this means that your sympathetic nervous system is activated, so you can switch and turn on your parasympathetic system, the calming part of your nervous system, by making your out breath longer than your in breath and really paying attention to the out breath. You can also do it by feeling any sensation of relaxation, release, ease, or settling in the body or breath. So as you breathe out, let your shoulders relax a little bit and release any tension that you might be holding on to in your chest and bring your attention there. Because whatever we bring our attention to will grow in our mind and in our body. So bring your attention to your long out breath and the relaxation that comes from that, and it helps us to deactivate. Now, despite all of these efforts, sometimes we are so activated in the moment that we just can't handle a conversation with another person. And when that happens, after we recognize that we have reached a limit, it's not only okay, but often preferable to honor our limit and stop before crossing the threshold. A good way to take a break from the conversation consists of two parts. First, in expressing your desire to stay connected, and second, in sharing your need for a break. So you can say something on the lines of, I'm committed to working this out between us, but my mind is too clogged up. So can we come back to this later tonight? Or, I really care about this, but I'm too worked up in the moment. Can we take a break and come back tomorrow? When we can attend to our reactivity by grounding in our body, we can make wiser choices about what to say and respond assertively rather than passively or aggressively. So at this point, we'll be shifting our focus to the second area of how to work with a difficult conversation, which is understanding ways to prepare for a difficult conversation. If you wish to take a break, feel free to do so. Pause the video and get yourself a nice cup of tea or coffee and take some time to reground yourself. If you think of the last time when you had a difficult conversation with someone, it is possible that it happened unexpectedly, out of the blue, giving you no time to prepare for it. But sometimes we're in situations in which something happens between you and another person, and you have time before deciding to engage in a conversation to resolve the issue. In this case, it's good to prepare for what can be a difficult conversation ahead of time. So why is this important? Because it helps to clarify what's most important to us, reduce reactivity, and increase the likelihood that we will be able to engage in a way that is in line with our intentions. So how can we prepare for a conversation like this? Let's explore together in this section of the lesson. The first thing that you can do to prepare for a difficult conversation is to clarify your observations. Notice any judgments or stories you have about the situation and ask yourself, am I making any assumptions or interpretations? If so, what are the feelings and needs beneath them? Take some time to sit with and identify the feelings you might have and understand what really matters to you in the situation. It's the exercise of breaking down your judgments into observations, feelings, and needs that we explored in the earlier lesson. However, if you have any judgment that cannot be avoided, then be ready to say it explicitly in the conversation. Don't pretend that it doesn't exist. but take responsibility for the judgment that you have by saying, my story about this situation is this. By expressing it, it can help to clarify the difference in interpretations between the two parties if there is any. And the next thing that you want to do to prepare for a difficult conversation is to step into the other's shoes. Ask yourself, am I convinced that I am 100% right? And would I rather be right or find a way to work things out? If your answer to the first question is a yes and you would rather be right, then perhaps you may be too deeply embedded in a survival mode that's making you stuck in your own story. Once you find yourself more open to stepping out and finding a way to work things out, then ask yourself these following questions. What information might I not have about the situation? How might they be feeling? What might they be needing? And are there things I can take responsibility for? Actually sit down and write down your answers to these questions. By doing this, you are stepping into the shoes of the other party and developing empathy. This step can also help you to approach the conversation with humility and a sense of curiosity. And the third thing that you want to do is to clarify your request. Ask yourself, what would resolve this situation? Now, there are two layers of request. One is relational and the other is logistical. For a relational request, you want to be asking yourself, what kinds of understandings do I wish to establish with the other person in regards to observations, feelings, and needs? Is there certain information that, if shared and understood, can lead to better connection between you and the other person? And the second type of request is a logistical request. It's about asking for what you want the other person to do and sharing what you are willing to do to move things forward. So this is more about actions to be taken. So the key here is to find out before you go into a conversation, what is it that you want out of this conversation? Is it to develop better understanding about each other and to cultivate a more connected relationship? And or is it to move things forward on a strategic level? And write down any ideas for what you wish to ask for from either one or both types of requests. And the next thing that you want to do is to ask yourself, how do I wish to be in this conversation? It's important to clarify your intention for a conversation. Are you approaching this conversation to understand or to resolve rather than to blame and accuse? Write down clearly what your intention is. And it's important to recognize that at certain points in the conversation, you might get activated because it could be a very difficult conversation. So, like I mentioned before, it's important to rehearse your deactivating mechanism. How are you going to recognize that you're being activated? How are you going to ground yourself? And how are you going to deactivate yourself? And if you feel comfortable enough, you might actually role play this conversation with a friend or a family member that you really trust. When rehearsing, it would also be useful to physically rehearse the grounding and deactivating work that you plan to put into place. Now, this was a pretty long section about how to prepare for a difficult conversation. If you wish to take a break before moving on to the final section, please feel free to do so. In this section of the lesson, I would like to share with you a few tips that you can apply during a difficult conversation. First, think of the best time and place to have a conversation. Check with the other person if they're up for talking and get agreement from them. Don't just catch them out of the blue. Second, how you start a conversation is very important as it sets a tone for how the rest of the conversation goes. As much as possible, it's preferable to start with a neutral observation. If it's not possible, state your judgment with, my story about this is da 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 da, and take responsibility for your judgment. And third, aim to listen to the other person first. Empathy shows the other person our interest to understand them, which helps to lower tension and take down someone's defensiveness. This in turn increases the chances that they will want to listen to you. Understanding each other is key to conflict resolution. So if it takes multiple times to empathize on any topic, then be willing to do so. And lastly, remember to pause. When the conversation becomes more heated and tension builds, it's natural for a conversation to move quickly, which can make you more reactive than purposefully in line with your intention. Monitor the pace of the conversation and remember to slow down the pace of your speech. Breathe deeply and ground yourself to create pauses in the conversation. So in summary, this lesson focused on building skills to handle reactivity, prepare for a difficult conversation, and conduct a difficult conversation. To wrap up everything we talked about in this entire unit, there are 3 things I wish for you to take away. First, lead with presence. Stay in your body because when you're not present, you are on autopilot or you're reacting automatically. So it's important to pause frequently and do this to monitor your activation and regroup and ground as needed. And second, come from curiosity and care. A genuine intention to understand others can be felt by the other person. And we can even state this explicitly by saying that I have the desire to understand you, to work things out. And this can really help to open the other person up to possibilities. And lastly, focus on what matters. Focus on deeper needs and objectives because most conflicts happen at the level of strategies, what we want and what we do. Try to uncover the why we do what we do and what our needs are behind what we want. Because this is where we have the most chance to hear each other and come up with creative solutions. And when we focus on what matters, it's so important to put your needs right by the needs of others, not above and not below, because you are both equally important. And be open to collaboratively brainstorm ways to move forward that will meet as many, if not all needs that are present. So as you move forward in your life and face difficult conversations, I hope you can practice the skills that you learn in this lesson. And instead of remaining divided, find ways to understand and connect. So best wishes to you all.